can access several services and meet several needs in one visit. Um, all of our staff work together. They might have different departments that they're in, but they work together. They share communal areas. We have full staff meetings at least once a year. We have a social committee. We do things like this so that all our staff feel like they're one team. And that has been really key for us for integrating services, because you have an invested interest in your coworkers and what they're working on. And so you learn about it. And the better educated, the more knowledgeable somebody is on a program, the more likely they are to think of which client they're working with that might fit and make that referral. So that has been really key with us. We're really one staff that just has different people working on different projects. Our LBS program over the years have evolved our programming to do more targeted training, and that is a result of these integration of services. Working with our employment services, we see that people are looking for shorter term upgrading so that they are job ready faster. They don't have 6 months to a year to spend upgrading. They need to get back to the employment field as soon as possible. So that made us break things into smaller targeted training that people could do multiple programs of, but it's more manageable. So that really helped with integrating with employment services. And then we started developing pre-app upgrading for our own pre-app for cooks program that we have here, and also working with LIUNA. Again, once LIUNA learned what LBS could do, it made sense for them to delegate some of that math upgrading to us. It was a natural relationship. And again, because we have newcomer programs here, we had always, once they were eligible for LBS, we would do a transition, but they could come to the same school, or they would attend classes in the same hall. So it wasn't a difficult transition to make too. So those partnerships have worked really well. And with our newcomer programs, now that eligibility has been updated, we'll just see more of that. Because one of the things that we saw is if they got citizenship at SELB level 4, we had to refer them elsewhere, which wasn't ideal. So having all these services in one place, really having our staff work as one team, has played a huge role in how we integrate services. I'll send it back over to Jane.
Thanks, Melody. I'm just going to share my screen here, and I'm just going to say, Jim, I was just going to tell you, I just saw that you said you can only see one. Go up to your view in your right-hand corner, and you can click on gallery. You've just got speaker on right now, and so that's what happens. Okay, let me share my screen here, Christine, for yours.
Thanks, Jane. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your almost Friday afternoon. So as mentioned in the beginning, Christine Vandegraff, I've been always for more than I have been involved in literacy. I started in employment, actually 31 years. And what I hope to share with you today is a perspective. As with Melody, I do oversee employment services and took on the literacy portfolio for our association in 2005. So I'm not new to literacy, but my first sort of position in the Employment Ontario world has been employment. And it took me a long while to get accustomed to and understand the workings of LBS. So hopefully the presentation today will be helpful for you and how we built the partnership. If you could change the slide for us, please. So for example, with employment service, I want to let you know that they are going into, or many of them actually across the province. We're just waiting for Toronto and the two norths to come on board into transformation. And what the employment service providers are going through right now, or what we went through in one region in Hamilton, what we continued to see or thought of was pure hell. Just because it was monumental change, first during a pandemic and then during a time like we were dealing with change in a pandemic with a lot of unknowns around us, as well as moving to online delivery. And one of the things that transformation has brought for employment services is we're working with higher barrier clients. And when employment service job seekers come in to see us, because there is that low level, or there could be a low level of motivation and social skills, one of the things that's really, really important is if you're trying to integrate with employment services or try to figure out how to, work together, they're very performance managed. In fact, that the first sort of view for them is to get people working, nothing else. And then the second thing is that sometimes our clients, when they come into employment service, because they're so laser focused on getting employment, they don't necessarily see other options as valid or of value. It's like, well, how is this going to help me get employment? How is it going to pay my rent? How is it going to, deal with my income stuff that needs to happen? So during transformation, this is more evident than ever. We're seeing clients that are highly barriered. We're working with clients that on Ontario Works that may have less than grade 12 education, or that they've been out of the workforce for several years. In fact, in our two transformation areas, Hamilton that went through first in January 2021, and then my second area in Halton that has just gone through this April, we're sort of in the 10th month of transformation. We're seeing the average time that someone that's been on Ontario Works and perhaps out of the labor force is like 6 years. So you can imagine how things have changed for us as professionals. You can imagine the type of barrier that these clients now, these sort of intended job seekers are going through. And ultimately, the challenge that the employment coaches that are working in employment services tasked through a performance-based model where their funding comes from success to work with clients that may lack motivation and social skills, may lack in-demand digital writing, reading, comprehension, and looking at getting them back into the labor force as quickly as possible because their funding's riding on it. So when I think about this, and when you're trying to connect with your employment service partners, if you're not co-located, like the benefit that Melody has, or you haven't really had a big opportunity to connect with them, or they haven't listened to you before, or just relationships have been difficult or challenging, this is something that you might want to consider and think about. So, what problem can you solve for them? And it might sound selfish, like, why do I have to, bow down to what employment service wants? And, that kind of thing. Why do I have to change my stuff, to fit their schedule? But I think it's about us working together and finding that common place for where we can serve our clients for mutual benefit, including some learners that you might have to get them, making the community well. So next slide, please. Who's ever doing the slides? So one of the things that I want to point out is, even though I oversee employment service staff, so I have a staff of 33 employment staff and 7 LBS staff. And even though I oversee both, and my both staff teams appreciate me within their silos. Absolutely. At the beginning of this transition, I too needed to convince both sides the value of working better together. Um, Before transformation, there wasn't, yeah, there were referrals, sure. But like I mentioned, because employment service job seekers are so laser focused on going to work, as soon as we mention even the word of, upgrading or skills building or anything like that, they're like, no, just help me get a job. Like, I'm here for a job. Don't refer me to anybody else. I just want to go get a job. And so, our clients were difficult to redirect, but also our LBS learners that we had, and the LBS instructors was like, well, that's not my job to help them find a job. It's not my job to, do that. And I'm like, well, so I really had to speak the language so that both understood what did it look like, and talk to them about what were going to be the benefits of them working together with one client, and that sort of, how are they going to help each other? And so if you look on the left of, so we focused on essential skills because I think that was the one commonality that both staff sets understood. So for example, when we look at, find and use information, and I pulled this example specifically to a recent experience, which Jane made mention of, with the Better Jobs Ontario Readiness Program, in the sense of, find and use information. So in employment, the employment coach might spend 30 to 40 hours helping clients seek out schools and costs and looking at just information they need to build the business case for Better Jobs Ontario. And when I said that, this could be done in a way that was self-paced for the client, for the learner client, and they didn't need to spend that 40 hours, it could be supported and supplemented by a partner, that really opened their eyes to the benefit. So it goes on with some of the examples here that you'll see, communicate ideas and information. So when we have to submit Better Jobs applications, there's lots of charts to complete. There's the 7-page Better Jobs Ontario application in and of itself. There's writing a personal letter. There's, looking at the numbers in the budget. So what's it going to be like to go back to school, or the financial literacy and how it's going to impact them, what it's going to be like to go back to school for a year and live off $28,000. The digital technology in the sense of using Better Jobs Ontario online portal, uploading, downloading, saving documents, not losing them after you've worked 3 weeks on them. So how does that work? And then managed learning, understanding the different platforms that are available when they go back to post-secondary, the learning management systems, the My Canvases, the Litmuses, the whatever, and then how to help them pace and complete the program. Remember, the ministry was looking at this integration because when people start Better Jobs Ontario, they want completion, because it's obviously a waste of taxpayers' money if for whatever reason our learners and job seekers don't complete. They don't get the outcomes they need, the money is wasted, they don't move on into the employment market. So this is beneficial. And then when you look at engage with others, like having them to be able to contact schools, if, like I said, an average person being out of the labor market or just out of socialization in a while, depending on their situation, do they know how to contact schools? Do they know how to sign the contract with the ministry for Better Jobs Ontario and teachers and instructors? What happens if they're failing? So I think once I was able to speak that language with both sides and how it fit the issue, things went a little bit smoother for the value, and they saw the purpose of the potential collaboration. The other thing I needed to set up for everybody was I definitely needed to talk about appropriate referrals. So each of them knew who was there. And you'll see on the screen there that you know, they've been out of school for longer training. They may not have completed high school. Maybe they don't have the prerequisites for their training goals, or maybe they're just unsure. We're getting a lot of people on Ontario Works and job seekers in general, especially if they've been laid off. We're starting, believe it or not, we're starting to see a lot of layoffs once again. And so, you know, after being out of the job search market and maybe going back to school, we're seeing that uncertainty and the upheaval to be able to help them move back into something. So we talked to them about what was an appropriate referral if you're looking, and just so that you know, our current ES caseloads are about 300 per employment coach. So when you look at that, they need to know, out of my 300, who should I refer? So next slide. This goes in a little bit. So client would like to update or refresh their academic skills. Client wants to develop digital technology. Client wants to develop financial literacy or needs support to create a budget. Again, it helped them to narrow down who of their big caseloads should they be referring. And so that there is that appropriate referral. And then next slide. The other thing we noticed is when we were speaking with them, we needed to make sure that the referral was easy. We all know that we have much too much paperwork in our service right now, both on the literacy side as well as employment services. And we needed to make sure that that was going to go smooth. It was one form that was completed. It wasn't, you know, war and peace. And that it was easy for the employment coach and the LBS providers to you know, connect with each other should there be any questions or that kind of thing. And so we created a Microsoft form and we shared it with our community partners. So it was a 2-minute form. And it basically took them 2 minutes to make a referral. There was no additions, there was no uploads, there was no referral forms. It was basically a Microsoft form that they could refer to, and we would contact the client and also report back to them what was happening. And then if for some reason the client, we lost contact or we couldn't contact, we would definitely promise to report back to them and make sure that there was connection. Next slide. So last slide for you guys today. Other tips is try to provide collaborative services during the ES times. And I'll tell you why. Not unlike us in literacy, ES providers have trouble getting people in the office. It has to be very task-based. It has to, like, they're not just coming in to hang around. So what we tried to do is that if ES was having a workshop that we would take on, so ES would do a workshop on resumes and cover letters, and then we would go in and do digital skills for an hour or 2 hours after they finish the resumes and cover letters, so that we could help them understand how to upload their resume to a OneDrive or to a Google Drive for them. We would show them skills that they would need to happen. And that way, much like, you know, Melody said, with her staff being co-located, that's definitely a benefit. However, that's not always possible for some of us. Like your nearest, like you may not be co-located with an ES site or with, you know, someone that your next partner might be, I don't know, 30 kilometers away. So how do you be purposeful if it's by Zoom or by, you know, digital means? The reality is that's an authentic workplace material now, Zoom and Teams and, you know, getting things done. So how do you make those connections and tag along with what's already being happening? The other thing we needed to do is offer flexible learning. So online or in the evenings, most ES clients need to work. I don't know anybody that is in these predicaments per se that can afford to not be working. So if they are coming into services, you want to make sure that you have flexibility, that if they have to work some shifts, that they can come in and drop in and be flexible. And then lastly, but not, you know, definitely sure and point as important, is making sure that you follow up with the employment coach for progress and motivation. Like you're working together with them, and the more relationships you build, the better it is going to be for your client, as well as just keeping in touch with the client so that you don't have lost contacts and you don't have, someone just kind of leave the earth. That will still happen, but you want to try and minimize that situation from happening. And I think that's the end of my slides. So again, just coming, and I know my time is short, and as I said, or Jane read in my biography, I'm always willing to share. Like I've been in this business long enough to know that what goes around comes around. And if there are resources or questions that people have, I still got my own job to do because as you can see, my portfolio is pretty big, but I'm always willing to jump on a call for a couple of minutes or, answer emails if you have questions. The other thing I want to offer is that the YMCA is pretty vast with employment services, not so much with LBS services, but definitely with employment services across the province. So if you happen to be in an area where the YMCA has an employment service, we meet as a provincial group once a month, and I definitely don't mind helping to make those introductions for you to be able to, say or put in a good word for your LBS service to start collaboration. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Christine. Like, that's a wonderful offer. We actually had some folks ask if you would be willing to share the form that you have created.
Absolutely.
So if you make sure if you want to get that to me, I can make sure I get it out to Stacy and she'll get that out, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. Really good information. I'm totally surprised. I had no idea employment service folks are dealing with 300 people in their case files. That's crazy.
Average.
I'm sorry, my hair is standing up on my arm on that one. It's kind of like, oh no, that's really horrible. Oh, okay, gives me a lot more empathy towards them now. So Lisa, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Hello, folks. That's me. Jane, you can flip to the next slide, or whomever is dealing with the next slide. So we, at the Literacy Group, we provide your basic sort of LBS programs. We're a community-based organization. So our core group of students are the lower levels of students that we would normally see. So essential skills or OALCF levels 1 and 2. We do, however, totally and completely agree with Melody that a lot of the shift of late has been to modular programs or short-term programs, because these are the things that folks in the community who are looking for work are really wanting for all of the reasons that have been discussed already. And so with the kind of programming that we can offer, we offer our modular programs to level 3 students as well. And have done so in a variety of different ways. Our Keystone program, also our Gateway program, is our customer service program. It's a 12-hour program that we deliver, had been delivering in person, but now not completely, but almost completely online in Zoom. Is a primer on the Canadian work experience, and we look after things like POS training, we do body language, we look at communication, problem solving, conflict resolution, all of the things that you would need, not just from a restaurant and retail standpoint, but any kind of customer service, including the customer service that we provide as practitioners. We've hosted that program several times over at least a 10-year period now, both pre and during COVID shutdowns, where the program, even though we were running it as an LBS program for ourselves, we were also taking it out to a variety of employment service providers, Lutherwood, as well as some of the specific programs like Anishinaabe, as well as non-ES providers, non-provincial ES providers, but federal programs like One Roof, which is a youth homeless shelter. It's been used in a lot of different ways, and one of the, the ones that you see on the screen here, we integrated that program with the Get Set Learn program, which is the family literacy program where I started and cut my teeth in literacy, um, as a way to show parents that in addition to the family literacy training that they were getting in the original Get Set Learn curriculum, when they were asking for more information and more training using that Get Set Learn model, what they were telling us was that they were looking for short-term programming that was specifically geared to employment, so that when their kids started school, they were going to be stepping into either new employment or their first employment. And so we took the Get Set Learn curriculum, or the Get Set Learn framework, and we overlaid that on top of the customer service curriculum to talk about how working with someone in a workplace setting, negotiating for a raise, solving problems with your coworkers is no different than getting your 3-year-old to eat broccoli. These skills are transferable, and it was a great way for us to be able to take work and, learning for work purposes and learning for life purposes and family purposes, and really show those direct transferable skills. We have used the customer service program directly within the YJC program. Luther would often book us for customer service. We would parachute into their YJC program and deliver it to folks who were actually outside of our normal LBS bucket. Some of these folks in the YJC, especially in the summertime and during March break, were under 19 or 18. We were able to capture some of them in our exceptional bucket, so we certainly blew our 10%, but we used our additional funding from other sources to be able to provide that programming even if these students weren't going into CAMS. We did something similar with the working center with the customer service program, where during just prior to the pandemic, there were big numbers of Syrian refugees that were moving into Waterloo region, and the working center had a Syrian refugee program that they were running, and they were looking for this kind of training for folks who were going to be going into workplaces with employer sponsors and not having to worry about speaking English. They were going to be speaking Arabic, Persian, etc., etc. So we wouldn't normally have been able to register them because of their CLB levels, but we were able, because of how we built this program, to get an interpreter from the Y to come in, as well as find a place at the working center. And we brought a volunteer in to teach the curriculum. And this program became a three-way partnership between these three programs. And there were some folks who had more exceptional English skills that we were able to register, as well as some that needed the translation, and therefore we did not register those folks. So it was a really hybrid program for a variety of students. But we'd never be able to do that all on our own. It really required this three-way partnership with these two other organizations. We're doing the same thing with our digital literacy as well. That program right now is part of some of our underrepresented group funding, and we're moving it into a variety of places, not the least of which is the Somali Community Association Waterloo Region. So we're delivering that in the evenings to a group that is already meeting, that has the childcare already established, and we are bringing curriculum to that group. We did the same thing with Reading for Health, which is a very, very low-level vocabulary program that was geared toward immigrants in that were already taking programs at Cambridge, which is one of our community association programs. And then we have a long-standing Low German program that we run out of St. Jacobs in collaboration with a school board out that neighborhood, as well as the Woolwich Community Health Center. So very often with programs that are in the fringes of our either eligibility or suitability or fundability, we have to partner with other programs, whether they're employment services directly or whether they are other not-for-profit programs, that we can start bringing these programs further forward. If you could just flip to the next slide. So there's some fairly significant benefits, not the least of which to the participant is that they get to operate in new learning in a familiar setting with supports that are already pre-established, people that they know. Childcare might be available on site already that LBS doesn't have to worry about. And it expands their own community network. They have a safe place that they can go, but they're bridging new supports into what they're already doing. And then to the other site that we're working with, they may not have training human resources available, right? They don't necessarily have trainers on staff. They don't have access to curriculum potentially. They may not have the specific skills to teach in a particular area. They might be looking to recruit more participants to their own programs, and LBS programs might provide that drive for the folks to get involved. And then it expands, obviously, the human resources network with these other organizations as well. And then the obvious benefit for LBS organizations is that we get to expand. Actually, you can go to the next slide. That was very intuitive of you. So benefits to LBS. We have access to new groups of learners. And learners that we wouldn't necessarily have access to all the time. Often, as I said, childcare is on site. There might be specific demographic groups that historically we've not connected well with. That can be a huge benefit. Again, we may not have a specific skill set in-house. It could be related to youth programming. It might be related to newcomer programming. In the case of our translation services, it might be that we don't have someone from the ESL background working at our own organization, but they do at the other organization. It gives us better opportunities to support the communities where we work and where we live, in getting our fingers into parts of the community that we haven't been in before. And so, the benefits are there writ large for everyone who's involved. However, if you flip to the next slide, you'll see that there's also some things to really think about. And there are some risks that can be involved. So for example, you do need to be thinking when you're offering services off-site. We've heard from a couple of sets of folks already who have blended programs where you have programming that's on site in the same building, and there are very, very deep organizational connections between two branches in an organization. But if you're a standalone LBS program, that might not be the case, and you might be stepping into very, very different organizational paradigms that need to be waded through first. And with MOUs and evaluation and tracking and all of those sorts of things, there's risk management involved. If you're going to start stepping into the arena where you have not been before, I give you a specific example. When we're working with youth, our insurance policy at the literacy group is written specifically for adults. So we needed to expand our insurance policy for working with students who were minors. It's little things like that that you might not think of up front, but this is definitely something that has to be talked about, whether it's with your board or whether it's with your staff directly. There's accountability and communication deficits sometimes when we start projects like this, and it's really important to know who's responsible for what and where are those barriers between those responsibilities. And like all things, we've talked a little bit about taxpayer money, we've talked about success and outcomes of programs. How sustainable do you want these programs to be? How sustainable do you want the relationships to be? For us, whenever we have a project, whenever we build a relationship, my first look is at if we're stepping outside of the ministry sandbox for whatever reason, how do I pull that sand back into their sandbox? Because ultimately, with 70% of our funding as an organization coming from the ministry, I need to find ways to turn this into something that's a long-standing program and that's fully supported. So it might be that you have to look at doing things like sharing documentation, sharing intake forms, sharing and doing more than just collaborating, but actually sharing some of these resources to reduce the costs so that you can make these things sustainable. I think that might be my last slide because then we got to the question points for me, but I know we're grouping all the questions together. So I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, you have some interesting things with how you've redeveloped the program for customer service into a variety of different things. So I'm always amazed because it's like family literacy. How are we going to fit that in? And yet somehow you did. Christine did put up into chat, folks, the link to the learning form that they have created. So if you're wanting to see that, please check out the chat. And I'm just trying to get the next slides up. There we go. Okay, Robin, I'm going to put your slides up here and I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay, thanks, Jane. So I am going to focus a bit today on the integration of LBS into ESL or ESL into LBS, however you want to phrase that. Our program has a very long history of integrations, different integrations. Our LBS program is co-located with employment services. So we've been working closely with employment services for a long time and doing those types of integrations. They've been more challenging over the last few years with the implementation of the system service manager model, but we're working on getting those back. We've also, if I have at the end, I might just talk a little bit about something else I'm going to slide in that's just happened to us recently in terms of an integration. Anyways, I thought the ESL is a really hot topic right now in the field. For many reasons. Primarily, I think because we've seen a huge influx of newcomers into Ontario over the past 3 or 4 years. And a lot of the programming that is available that is funded specifically for that group is now inadequate. And there's a few reasons why that's happened. The federal funding, most federal projects are funded on a 5-year funding cycle. So we're in year 4 of 5 years right now. So that means when those proposals were put in 5 years ago, they didn't necessarily anticipate the waves that we've seen in Ontario. We had a sense, but again, it seems like there's been a lot more than what was expected. Also, a lot of the English as a second language program is funded now by the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development. And that's a change that happened a couple of years ago. And when ESL changed ministries, the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development promptly cut funding province-wide by about 30%. So it wasn't done based on performance or what was happening. It was just basically a 30% cut. So that whole system took a fairly big hit in terms of funding. So you had a lot of people who were waiting for service. So I'm going to also say I do run both programs at the school board. So I run LBS and I also look after the English language classes program. And it's always easier to integrate if you have a little bit of that level of, I guess, control over the programs. It does make it easier. Having said that, though, these two programs are not co-located and had always run very independently. We started really doing some serious integration about 3 years ago. So during COVID, we didn't see any type of a drop in terms of our ESL attendance or demand. But then we did see that drop in funding that happened with the ministry change. So we found that we had a lot of people in our area And I primarily serve Brantford, but we have a lot of secondary migration that happens from Hamilton, which is one of the main entry sites for immigrants in Ontario. So we had a lot of people that had been assessed for service for language training, but they were waitlisted because there just weren't seats available. So that was kind of one of the big audiences we were seeing. We also, and this always happens, we have a group of people who are unable to access ESL because they have schedules that don't work with what is typically full-time programming. So most language training programs run full-time days, Monday to Friday, not all, but most, depending on the size of your center. So that's a challenge for clients who might actually be working or who have come in on certain different people come in and they have different levels of support when they come in, depending on their status in Canada. And some people don't have a lot of support for a long time and need to get a job right away. So that's challenging for them because they need to get a job and they also don't have the ability to attend necessarily full-time language training. So that's another big target audience. And I'll talk about the third one after I talk a little bit more about the program itself. So we saw a need and we knew that in literacy and basic skills, we could work with language learners as long as they were able to engage with our material in a meaningful way. So prior to the recent LBS guideline change that happened in December of 2023, the guidelines referenced Canadian Language Benchmark 6 in speaking and listening, but the reference was a guideline, so it wasn't a rule. And we always took it as a guideline and not as a rule. CLB 6 has now been removed so that there isn't any confusion over whether or not that is a guideline or a rule. So that's kind of a bonus for everybody in the province because it just opens the field a little bit more for people to be able to serve clients that maybe are more on the English language training end without having that subjective interpretation of what that guideline meant, if that makes sense. So because we had this group of people, we wanted really to just try to get them some service while they were waiting to be able to get into language training or get them service in general because they couldn't access language training. So we decided that we would try a program out, run a program. And we have a number of targeted training programs that we've been marketing for years, and we call them the Get Set programs. So we have Get Set for customer service, Get Set for PSW, Get Set for online credit. We have a whole bunch of them. So we decided to just brand this under that same group of targeted training programs, but we called it Get Set for ESL. And that kind of fit in nicely with how we wanted to market it and put it out there. And what we did is we essentially started a class for people who would be able to interact with the material that we were going to work with them. So we're not talking about people who are at a CLB level 1 or literacy level because their language is so low that it would be very hard for them to interact at all. But we also didn't require people to be at a CLB 6 for speaking and listening. And that's kind of how the project started. So as I said, we started it about 6 years ago, or I'm sorry, 3 years ago. And we've been running it pretty continuously for the last 3 years. Thanks. Lisa just put in the notes, must be able to receive instruction in English, and that's correct. So they have to be able to participate in LBS programming. And that really opens up who can participate. And of course, we're delivering, our focus is often related to employment, just the targeted training that we're delivering. So we're delivering material that they want to engage in. At the same time, it gives them an opportunity to participate in programming right away if they're on a wait list so that they don't have to wait forever to get into programming. One of the one of the things that we found, and this is more in that as it's become more established, is that we've developed target audience number 3 in our programming, which is the bring a friend target audience. And that's not something that we actively encourage or market. It's just something that actually happens, which is very interesting in that people will be participating in class and they show up with their friends all the time. So it's great because it's reaching out to people that are interested in getting service, but maybe wouldn't have traditionally got there through other mechanisms. So it's just, we call it the Bring a Friend program. And we've had a lot of people come into the programming as a friend of somebody else. It can be overwhelming for the instructor if somebody shows up with 2 or 3 people on a given day, but we try to facilitate or accommodate that as much as we can. So next slide, please, Jane. So I'm just going through some of the questions that Jane had asked, and I know you're also gonna ask some of the questions, but I'll just talk about some of the things that we've learned. Some of the challenges we experienced were definitely a learning curve for our instructors, but that was a challenge and also a benefit because I think the instructors I have been instructing for a long time and they were looking for a new challenge. And I think they've really enjoyed implementing this programming and integrating with a new group of learners. And it's been really great for them. When we initially started this program, we thought it would be better to offer it on site where language training was being offered, because we thought that would make it easier to facilitate learners moving into language training when a spot opened up for them. So that was our initial model that we used. And it's really interesting because despite the fact that no matter what, as soon as a spot opened, people would transition into language training unless they chose not to, which doesn't happen very often. There was distrust from the other staff, and by the other staff, I mean the English language training staff, around what was happening. It was internally within our own 2 programs, there was distrust that we were stealing clients, which we weren't, because they couldn't actually access service. So that was a bit of a challenge we had to deal with. And then capacity was also a challenge because we had a lot of people waiting, or people that wanted to access service, way more than we could even handle. In the newer iterations of what we're delivering, we've actually moved the programming back to our literacy and basic skills site. We happen to also be co-located with employment services at that site. So we found that is just works better within between the 2 groups. And it also means that we've had an opportunity to make some more connections for the clients with employment services, which is great. We tend to find that what happens is if a client is working with us and also working with employment services loves it because they know when they're going to be on site attending a class, and they will try to seek or schedule an appointment with that person around that time to cut down on the number of times they have to have the person come out. So that's been really helpful, I think. One of the things that the instructors, I think, were really shocked by, but loved, is that my easier to expected with this particular integration is attendance. Attendance is phenomenal in these groups, and the motivation is amazing. And it's not that LBS learners aren't motivated, but just the difference in the number of people who are motivated and the steady attendance. It's great. And I think just an interesting observation that they made around that. So next slide, please. One of the, just a few things about this, because even though both of the programs, I run both of the programs and they're technically part of the same organization, again, they ran very independently. So one thing I found and we learned was the communication part is really key. And I alluded to that when I talked about the distrust in staff around, are you stealing our clients? So communication was key, but it had to be something that we communicated over and over again in many different ways. And we did do that, and I continue to do that to this day. So it's a continuous discussion between everybody. The other thing when you're embarking on any kind of integration is, I think one thing to be wary of is to manage the expectations of everybody. So when we initially started this, we called it a pilot, and this has nothing to do with Skills for Success pilots. This is way before that happened. And we did it as a pilot to give ourselves an out in case things weren't working, because we didn't want the clients to have expectations if it wasn't working from all aspects of programming. So that's just, I think that's about all I have to say about this particular integration. I was just going to talk quickly about something that's happened to us since this webinar came up, and it's a new integration for us, and that is with an organization that offers transitional housing. And I know Lisa talked a little bit about you've done that in the past, but we had an opportunity. I have some fantastic staff, and they just have a great connections. And there was just a conversation that happened with somebody who works in an organization that offers transitional housing. And this turned into a meeting. And within 2 weeks, we were offering programming at that on-site in the transitional housing site. So the way she approached it in order to get this going is they really compared the type of programming that they wanted to offer the clients in that particular environment. And those clients are in that environment for up to 90 days at a time. And they compared it to what we offer in terms of all the different targeted training programs we have, and basically mapped out against what we could offer and what they would like to be offering, but couldn't because they are just so stretched, even more so, I think, than literacy and basic skills. And within a week, we were in there offering programming. Lots of kinks to still work out, but it was just, I guess, seize any opportunities that come up and just do it. Try it out. Just call it a pilot, though, so you always have that out. And that's
great, Robin. I love that. It's like carpe diem. Seize those carpe diems. Or what was it they said on Rick and Morty? Carpe those diems. I can't remember what they said, but yes, I watch good TV. Thank you for pointing out about the new changes with the taking out that CLB 6, because some people thought it was really an absolute. Am I frozen? It might be me. Anyways, I'm coming back again, I hope. Okay. Oh, good. You can hear me. It just things freeze up. All right. I told you I was unstable. We had questions, and these were particularly for Melody and Christine. How do you fit short courses in and meet the ministry's expectations for length of training?
I can go first. I don't mind. So with our, it came in a shift in mindset. Many years ago, we had an ETC from the ministry who would come in, and she used to be a teacher, and she would stand in front of the class, and she would basically ask them lots of different questions that are related to literacy and the progress they're making and all this stuff. And then about 7 years ago, I want to say, I got a new ETC. The Halton office changed their structure so that the ETC coming in wasn't a literacy specialist. She redid the monitoring visit and the requirement on the form to ask generic questions of the learners. And how we got around it was we said our programs are client-centered, learner-centered. So if someone needs to come in and learn, and the other thing I want to say, we focused on, it's not just literacy, it's basic skills. So whatever that basic skill is that they need in the time that we can get it to them so that they could transfer into the next step that they need it, why are we telling them or prescribing to them that they have to do it in more than 10 hours per week for a year, and when that's not what they need, right? So we made sure to tell always in every business plan that we do to the ministry, we say that our policies, our procedures, our programs are tied to labor market information based on what clients need at the time of service. So long as we can make it fit and align with the OALCF, and that they get something out of it to make it meaningful. And we haven't had any pushback at all. And in the there doesn't have to be a minimum number of hours for us. It's competencies. And I go, if the ministry ever questions me, I go back to them and feed them their own medicine and say, when you look at your training programs, even apprenticeship has moved away from hours. It's now competencies, right? So in the sense of saying that someone has to complete 100 hours or 7,000 hours to get an apprenticeship, it's not that anymore. It's a minimum, but as long as they meet the competencies and we show true competency progression, then that's what's important to be meaningful to an employer, to a learner. And we've never had any pushback in 7 years.
Which is funny because we did get pushback. When we had the customer service program just before the pandemic, we had 2 ETCs back to back say to us, how much LBS learning is actually happening in this particular program, even though we had a milestone at the end of it and all of those things. They wanted like serious documentation of exactly what was happening within that program to demonstrate that kind of learning. And this is part of our concern because we have a series of asks that are coming from the community, especially in and around transitional housing, that we are shying away from because what they want and what their clients need looks a lot more like a drop-in program, which right now, the way the structure has been working with LBS, I'm not sure that we'd ever get a pass on that. So there are parts of these programs that I feel like our hands are tied a little bit, but I'm really interested to see whether or not there can be a collective push to reduce those hours so that instead of having, for us, what's turned into really a minimum of 12 hours total in a targeted program that constitutes an LBS program, what happens if you sign someone up for something that's a 12-hour program that doesn't necessarily have a start and finish, but it's a bit more self-directed and it could take them X amount of time to get through? Again, I don't know whether or not that's sustainable under a ministry funded model because of those that red tape that they put around it, or whether we'd have to get people walking the bingo halls so that we can get bingo money to pay for it, right? It's that's that threshold for us seems to be the 12 hours for a targeted program. I'm just wondering if anybody else has had that same sort of experience.
So I'd like to jump in here. Our targeted training, we don't have any that's less than 4 weeks long. And they're here 4 to 5 days a week, like an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. So we did have some like 3-day workshops that we were told that's not long enough to benefit. Like how can they pass a milestone? So we've revisited and we rethought of how we looked at it. Because the reality is we're all going to get slightly different interpretations from ETCs. That's well known. And for example, I was instructed that CLB was a hard line and was not allowed to go outside of that. So what we do is it's how we approach the learner, because it is supposed to be learner centered. So we have this 4 weeks and we say, it's a 4-week commitment, but if you get a job, great, we're happy. If you attend 2 days and then you get a job, excellent, no problem. And we make sure the employment counselors know that, the Ontario Works caseworkers know that no problem. We don't have an issue with lack of completion because it's about the learner. Did they meet their goal in the end? And that has always been our standpoint. our very first targeted training. We're still running it. It's been modified. It's called Job Searching in the Digital World. It was meant as 10 years ago when job search websites were a little bit newer and a little bit more unknown, to help open that avenue and have learners be able to use software to make resumes, go online, but also teach them good communication skills, get that LBS part in there too. Well, the purpose of that was to get them in the door first to targeted training, but then have the instructors build that rapport with them and then say, listen, while you're still job searching, still job search, still do whatever you need to do. But while you're doing it, why don't we meet like a few times a week? You come into class and we'll work on your writing, because that would really make an impact when you're replying to these employers. So getting those little buy-ins. So it always started with, sure, they're going to attend 4 weeks, but they never just attended for 4 weeks. And then if they didn't and they got a job, great. And that's kind of how we built all of our targeted training around that. Was then we built on that. Okay, let's learn some Microsoft Word. We're working on communication. Let's work on that. Let's try Excel. Okay, well, let's work on budgeting, because you don't really understand Excel very well, because you don't understand money math. So a lot of it was just building into things. So yes, there's these short targeted training, but they're easy buy-ins for the learners so that we can kind of guide them down this road of better skills for a more successful outcome in the long run. So I think that that's really important when you're building this training and you're talking to your ETCs, be like, this is a standing point. This is not this is not 4 weeks and you're out. Have that, well, what if they need continued assistance? And they stay on the same service plan. We just modify it. We add goals, and then we show that, put in their file that we updated to add more skills. And I think that has worked really well for us.
Yep. And I mean, I said in my little presentation that the customer service program is our gateway program. It is the one that is most easily accessible for the learner. It's the one that has the fastest buy-in from an employment perspective. It's the one that's the most flexible with regard to the amount of time and the duration of the class, as well as the delivery of the class. But it's also the one that's the most fun. And it's the one that can be the bridge where someone says, oh, I can actually do a bit of online learning. And then that becomes the reason why they sign up for our grammar boot camp, which is also online, or Writing for Success, which is also online. I still think that there are going to be those programs, though, where we are really pushed to turn this into a program where we can actually register the student and get them into CAMS legitimately. Like I do still think there's going to be an ask from the community that we can't meet. And I think, you know, as program managers, executive directors, and frontline staff, we have to have figured out as an organization where we will and where we won't play in these sandboxes, because we could end up going down a road that is just not functional, that we can't manage on our own, which is why we have to start looking at this integrative piece where someone else can bring something to the table, so that that program ultimately pays for the folks that aren't LBS registered students, that turn this program into what's potentially a partial drop-in program that LBS registered students can access, but we know that they're going to be with us for a longer period of time. So you're getting the best of both worlds, because you've integrated what you're doing with LBS and a second funding stream that goes along with that.
Well, I think Christine gave some pretty good ways of stating that this is what you have to say to EDCs, because we have to remember as you know, as Melody was even saying on it too, is that ETCs will all have their different takes on things. And we've seen different things where, you know, they've said this is not an LBS program. And I usually then talk to Laura Hamilton, who Lord knows how much longer we're going to have Laura around for, but Laura was at least the saving grace, because she's going, I teach them that everything is LBS. Everything can be LBS. It's a hard thing. Like, we are the experts and we have to explain it back out. And I really believe Christine gave some really good ones of like throw back their own outcomes at them. So, you know, we've got to try to do it together as a team. It's like everybody's got to agree, right? So good ideas, guys. These are great. I know we kind of went off a little bit from the panel, but I think that's a really important question. Because years ago, when I first started in the field, back, when I was 12, I remember having people that would just come in the door to keep their job. I was asked by their employer to teach them to measure so that they could cut PVC piping in a certain way.
Mhm.
And they were in for literally less than an hour, and they were taught and they left. And so of course there was a good outcome. The guy kept his job and piping was cut properly. I don't understand why that can't work anymore. That doesn't make sense. It's like nobody should have that. Robin, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Jane. What I was just going to say, when we look at the whether or not it's a true program, we look at that, and probably 12 scheduled hours is pretty much our minimum cut to, I would say, Lisa, like just on average. But when we're describing it or talking about it, we look at it a little more, or describe it a little more holistically, and we talk about the fact that the learner might be in class for 12 hours, but they're not just learning while they're in class and they're in our program, because typically, as much as we don't give out homework, we have people do things when they're off site that support the learning that they're learning. So, that's that true task-based learning where we challenge them to go back and do this before you come back. So that's one way to kind of look at it. It's more than just those hours where they're sitting in the classroom. And when they report on the number of hours they're learning, we include the extra hours that they're putting into it, not just the hours that they're sitting in program. So just looking at it, and when you're talking about it with the ETCs, which vary vastly in the way they interpret things, very subjective. So it's just, being able to argue for that and explain that a person doesn't just learn when they're sitting in the seat, they're learning the whole time. Part of the thing you're doing is facilitating their ability to learn. So.
I love that. That's a great idea. I would have never thought to think of it in that way, Robin. Thank you. Christine, you have your hand up too.
I'll just share a quick funny story that, so last Wednesday we had our program visit from the ministry, and I had 2 ETCs come out, and they were so very interested in our Google Classroom with the BJOR program. And we took the opportunity, because they're also ETCs that evaluate BJO applications when they go into the ministry. And we actually had them do one of the exercises, and I think it was like uploading or downloading something into something. And it was interesting that you guys talk about this and how, quickly someone can move through something versus how someone might take longer. The 2 ETCs, the one ETC got the exercise really quickly while the other one struggled with it. And I said, that proves to me, that's how we work with clients. It's self-paced, self-managed, but it's supported, right? So the pace doesn't matter. It's their ability to work through the material in that case. Now, again, because we're a non-credential granting organization, like I can't give someone a diploma or a degree, or I can give them a certificate, but let's face it, at the YMCA, a certificate from the YMCA, what does that really mean, right? So and that was my way of convincing them that this is how it works. What skills have you learned? And how quickly you learn them or not learn them is client-centered. So I just wanted to share that. It happened when they came we had our audit, and they did CLI, LBS, and the skills for success. And the approaches that we use for all 3 programs could be very different. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thanks, Christine. I was just thinking, all the certificates I got from everybody, they don't mean much, do they? Oh, I give myself certificates sometimes. Lisa, you used to have your hand up too.
I do, and the certificate piece actually is funny because it depends on what the certificate means, right? It may not necessarily be that an employer recognizes that certificate, but when you show it to them, but if the certificate in your portfolio when you go for a job interview happens to be something that jogs your memory about what you learned in that class and how you formulate your ideas and how that's going to play in this work environment that you're hoping to start at, right? That can be a very, very big game changer. So academically, maybe it's not worth the paper that it's been printed on, but functionally, it could very much be that. The experience of having your ETCs go through some of your programming leads me actually to something that we haven't talked about yet, especially when we talk about not necessarily being co-located with one of your partner agencies, is that often what we've done when we're introducing our gateway program into other community areas is we invite them and their staff to audit the program. So here's the link to the class. Come and sit in. You're the ones that are going to have to refer your folks to this class because that's what we're asking you to do. You may as well get a feel for what it's actually like instead of me telling you and being the talking head. You need to see this instructor. You need to see these materials. You need to see the interaction that's happening in the class. Throw the door open for your referees to actually come in and see what's going on. They're more likely to collaborate with you on partnered curriculum even, or invite you to present that curriculum, more frequently or as part of what they're doing in their programming if they get to see it firsthand.
This is great. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody. I love when discussions go on that are very interesting. I do want to get back to some of the questions because I know the interpreters have to finish at 3:30. So let's just ask, what were the biggest challenges you faced when integrating LBS into other systems? Melody, I'm going to bring it back to you.
I think that the biggest challenge was really buy-in from the learner. It's not so much from buy-in from the organization as they look at it like, how am I going to sell this, right? So they know they need that upgrading. That employment counselor or caseworker knows that they need that upgrading. That OW caseworker knows that they could benefit from upgrading. They tend to be aware of that. It's how do I sell this? So I always tell them just so our referrals are them just sending me contact information and I sell it to the learner, and try to pull out what that is that is deterring them. And often it's like, well, I need a job right now. Well, great. Are you spending 8 hours a day job searching? No. What can we do to improve your job search? Or are you spending 8 hours a day, whatever what they're busy with? Okay, well, what are you available for? How can we fit this in? So I think taking some of the sales pitch off of the caseworker really helps. And I just have them send their contact information, ask them for consent, of course, send their contact information to me. I'll do the selling. I know my program better. And I think that has overcome that challenge.
Thanks, Melody. I think we have Jessica has her hand up. Does she have an ability to ask a question here, Stacy?
Yes, Jessica, I just turned your mic on. You should be good to go.
I didn't know that.
Jessica is deaf. She's going to need video.
Okay, so Jessica, I'm going to promote you to panelist and then to co-host, and you'll have access to your webcam.
It is intended to be a disability support program, and it's a barrier. It's inaccessible in itself. Yes, we have to make a lesson plan for it. What do you mean? So Sarah was like,
Jessica, you should be able to turn on your video now. There we go.
Okay, finally. Hello, everyone. This is wonderful discussion. And I'm not sure if I'm off topic a little bit, but in terms of integrating with other programs, I think it's a great idea. It seems from what I've noticed quite often it's hearing organizations or agencies that are partnering together with other LBS programs. I'm wondering about the deaf stream. We're a very small number of LBS programs, and how can we partner with other agencies or organizations who have services, who are unfamiliar with deaf culture, our language, don't use ASL for instruction? I'm just wondering how that might work, and it seems that there hasn't been any focus or discussion on integrating access into these kinds of programs and partnerships. Just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
I think that's a very good question, Jessica, is that it's hard for us to, well, we can't speak for your culture, right? Because I don't deal with that, but I think Christine's got a point she's going to make here. Go ahead.
Just so that you know, in the Halton area, the Canadian Hearing Society is an employment service provider as well. So, and I think that challenge with us in employment services, I'll speak to employment services, is that we would have to have a larger cohort. You know, we could refer one. I'm thinking of my caseload in employment services. If I have someone that doesn't is hard of hearing, then I would refer them directly to Canadian Hearing Society, because they have the resources and the expertise to be able to work with that, where it would be an extra expense for me to be able to do that. So like I said, in Halton, the Canadian Hearing Society also provides employment services. So as an LBS agency, if you could look in your local area to see, is there that kind of service that focuses on that target group, that demographic that you could connect with. The other thing is definitely if reaching out to the ES provider, or the ES providers, to let them know of the service, because we don't have a lot of money per se. We would have to pay for it out of our operating to bring in a translator or an interpreter if there was someone that needed that resource. So again, speaking their language that you could help provide, and I mean interpreted language through ASL, to say that you could provide this service or work with them, you're going to speak, and then they'll be more likely to refer. At least I would be.
Yes, we have the same here, is that the Canadian Hearing Society is the employment service for deaf or hard of hearing. But they also used to be the LBS. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough learners to keep the program running, which is, it does lead to some issues. But what we've done, Jessica, I can tell you over the years, is if there is a situation, we have checked in with DLI and said, is there a program that can help us out remotely? So before COVID ever came out, the Ottawa program actually helped us out by becoming the LBS program for our region digitally, which was great. And I think you have those aspects now that we've all gotten used to COVID. Lisa, you have something to say.
Jessica wants to follow up, I believe, as well. Just what you mentioned about employment services through CHS. A lot of offices have closed and they've moved online, which has created many barriers and obstacles for a lot of deaf people who don't have the digital computer skills. They don't know how to use those services online. And because the offices are gone, that makes it inaccessible for them. I'm from Durham Deaf Services, and we find people heavily reliant on us. They used to be CHS clients, but they're very frustrated with the services they're no longer receiving. And so it's quite overwhelming for us. And CHS doesn't have a way to support these folks. And they're also cutting back on staffing. And I'm not sure what's happening with their system, but CHS is not the only employment service provider that we can rely on. And the deaf community is suffering because there's such a lack of resources available that don't meet our culture needs, our language needs. And it's very challenging for us to figure out and try to explain that we're a unique community, and we need further funding so that we can expand our programs and services to meet those needs, such as employment services, LBS, etc. Because we just don't seem to be able to partner up with people who can't meet our needs. So I just want to mention again, it's very different for the hearing community versus the deaf community.
Absolutely. I hear you on that, Jessica. I think hopefully the SSM that's starting there will be able to do something for this coming up, because I think Durham Region's got a really interesting SSM happening, right? So I hope, all I can hope, and maybe we can also help to advocate for you, because I think that that's something that we have to do from all sides. We're all in LBS together, right? So, let us know in the hearing and where we can help, and we'll help. Lisa, I'd love if you've got 30 seconds.
Indeed. One of the downsides is that, let's start with a benefit. One of the benefits with community-based literacy programs is they're often the ones that have one-to-one tutoring. So when we're looking at marginalized communities with really specific needs, like this need, Jessica, I think the one-to-one component is going to be of benefit. The downside to that is the one-to-one tutoring is often done by volunteers. So getting the right match for someone who is a volunteer who can work with someone who's deaf or blind, because I have this exact same conversation with folks at CNIB. But there are ways, and I think it won't necessarily be a blanket statement for every single client, but I do think that there are ways that we can kind of problem solve both ends toward the middle. The technology is there now to be able to have ASL available on mobile devices. And if it means that the ASL is available and it's paid for not by the LBS organization, but by another support org, there are probably ways that that can work. And I've had conversations before. Actually, I think Jim and I had a conversation before Christmas about how curriculum sharing might be helpful, where these gaps in between our programs are, and how can we maybe not get rid of them, we'll be realistic right now, but at least shrink them for some folks who might be able to access our services. So I'd still throw that out
Sorry,
there.
Lisa, I'm gonna have to cut you off.
All good.
But if everybody, thank you so much for participating today. Please click on the link that Stacy has put in the webinar chat, because the one that came up, the survey for evaluation, is not correct. The one she's put in, click on that. And thank you all so much for sticking around and listening to us. And thank you to our panelists for all the work you did and for sharing all of your information. It was great. And thank you, Stacy, for all your work on this from Contact North. Thank you so much. Have a great day.